Can we get seats for everybody? My goodness gracious, you'd think this was the marijuana bill. It isn't, in case you're here for that. We all have places to go. There's some seats in between. You may have to ask people to scoot over. But if you will do that, we have people that are going to be coming and going. But I will call this meeting to order. We now have a quorum, I think. 4, 5. Then we do have a quorum, and I'd like to introduce somebody we have new on our committee today. Mackenzie, you want to stand up? This is Mackenzie Joyner. She's an adopted godchild. And she's here observing what legislators do and also what her grandmother, a lobbyist, does for a living. So we are glad to have you with our committee today. Okay, first up that we have, and before everybody disperses, now we have to keep a quorum because we've got bills coming up. We have Dr. Ashley from the Georgia Trauma Commission. Dr. Ashley, you're going to have to keep it short and sweet and hit the road. Okay. But I'm very proud of what the Trauma Commission's done, and that is why I have asked Dr. Ashley to come and tell us a little bit about what they're doing across our state. Okay.
With that introduction, Madam Chair, I'll move quickly.
So if you have any questions, you can interrupt me or hold to the end. Thank you again for the opportunity to present, and my job or goal today is to give you that update on our accomplishments over the last year. You see the funding for this. This is not a budget hearing, but I will provide some financial information for you to look at because it ties into what we're doing. Our funding comes from the super speeder law. You see this is fees that are tagged on to the super speeder. This is the revenues for that. You see the fiscal year listed on the left side. You can follow the slides, or we do have handouts there. I'm on page 3 of the handout. You see in 16 we're projected to hit $20 million in revenues. We've been consistent with that, holding about $20 million over the last 2 years. Our budget is right around 15.3. Last year it was increased to 16.3 million. We've requested that we get the full amount of funding since this was intended for trauma care. We think it's reasonable to ask for the additional revenue that comes in from super speeder. The reason that is important to us is because if you look at the next slide, slide 4, this is the readiness cost for trauma centers, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 centers are the highest level or most sophisticated care. Level 2s are just right about that level, but the next level down. And you see the readiness cost there. If you go all the way down to the bottom left-hand corner for fiscal year 16, you see our budget is $16.3 million for the entire trauma system, and we have 6 level 1s, 11 level 2s, and the cost for those trauma centers are about $66 million. The state were only able to fund about $4 million of that through the commission, which is 7 cents on the dollar. So I'm going to show you some of the things that we've accomplished with 7 cents on the dollar, and you'll see why that I've asked for additional funding. If you look at the next slide, slide 5 or page 5, it's uncompensated care through Senate Bill 60, which is really our Bible. That's what rules the Trauma Commission, the law that we go by. We have to provide readiness costs as well as uncompensated care. And you see for 15, bottom left-hand corner, there was about 3,000 patients that qualified for that. $35 million in uncompensated care by the trauma centers. We're able to fund about $5 million of that, or about 15 cents on the dollar. So if we could just move up to the revenues that we bring in and go from 16 million to 20 million, that would allow us to bump up maybe from 7 cents on the dollar to 7.5 cents or 8 cents on the dollar, which would help us continue the trauma care that we're providing. If you go to the next slide, just very quickly to give you an overview of the proposed budget for 16, you can see how it's broken down there. I won't go through every line because you have it in front of you, but you can see through Senate Bill 60, some of the funding is provided for trauma centers and physicians, EMS stakeholders, system development, and we've been able to fund all those through that bill. I will point your attention to the last line there that says the Georgia Trauma Foundation. Through Senate Bill 60, we were supposed to form a foundation, and I'm happy to say that we've received permission, or our 501c3 from the IRS in June of 14, and that foundation is just starting to get off the ground. It's up and running. I'll make a couple of comments on that later in the presentation. Just to show you the next slide, slide 7, where the trauma centers and physician fundings go. Again, it's broken down into readiness costs, which again is only 7 cents on the dollar. Uncompensated care, we provide some registry software for the hospitals, and anything that goes into readiness costs. If you look at the next slide, slide 8, I'll transition now into sort of some of the accomplishments over the last few years. You see in 2008, we started with 4 level 1s and 9 level 2 centers. As we started working with you, as you provided funding, in 2009, we were able to add another level 2 center on in Athens Regional. This was a geographic area of the state that needed more trauma care, and we're very excited about them coming aboard. If you look in 2011, we upgraded our level 1s. Atlanta Medical and Eggleston upgraded from 2s to 1, and we got another hospital that to come into the trauma system, Kennestone, that had been in the past, but I believe had dropped out, and they came in as a level 2. In 14, we were able to add Northeast Georgia as a level 2 trauma center, which filled a big need in that area in the northeast part of the state. And you see now we're up to 6 level 1s, 10 level 2s, and we hope that we can add another center within the next year. Now, with that being said, we've looked at the map. We've looked at hundreds of thousands of patients. We've done some pretty sophisticated mathematical modeling that we've learned from some of our colleagues in Florida that's nationally recognized in this area. And we've identified, if you will, a top 10 or top 5 list. And why are those hospitals listed? Does that mean they'll come into the system? No, but as we have limited funds, we want to spend those in areas with the greatest need. And we've finally been able to put some science behind that need. And the way that's broken down there, I won't go through all the numbers. If you want to ask me after the meeting, I'll be happy to go into it with you. But basically, we know which hospitals in Georgia are in underserved areas as far as no trauma centers, and now we know which of those hospitals see a lot of trauma patients or severely injured patients. Knowing those areas, we can target our funding. And so basically, we're working with OEMS&T, Dr. O'Neill's division, to try to recruit hospitals to come into the system that would provide the most benefit to the system.
Dr. Ashley?
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to take a point. If Phoebe Putney, one of our largest now medical groups in the state, if Phoebe Putney would become into the trauma network, wouldn't that clear up one of our biggest holes in the state?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
I'll show you a map of that in just a minute, and it'll sort of really solidify what I'm saying there. Moving very quickly into EMS, you see the funds that are provided there. I won't go through all those, but I am very proud, and the whole EMS community is very proud of that first bullet point where it says Automatic Vehicle Locator System, or the AVLS. This is basically a hot spot in the ambulance that we pay for the airtime for the ambulances across the state. And what that does is allow them to have immediate internet access, that they can transmit EKGs and other things to the ER before the patient even gets there. It also allows GEMA, if there's a major statewide disaster, they can flip a switch and see exactly where all those ambulances are in the state at any one time. So it's really helping GEMA prepare for a mass casualty. Other states have this, but we're one of the few states, or probably the top 2 or 3, that have it in a network as large as ours. So this is something Georgia should be proud of, and the EMS community should be proud of. If you look down there at the very bottom, you'll also see direct funding to region trauma advisory committees. The commission, along with OEMS&T, has asked each EMS region to form their own regional plan. We thought this would take several years, or at least 4 or 5 years, to implement. I'm happy to say that 4 or 5 regions now actually have a plan. 2 are in the development of a plan, and the other 3 or 4 have voted or agreed to start organizing that committee. So we're ahead of the game there. The reason that's important, you see in Region 1, who has a robust committee, they saw that they had a need with the major tornadoes that they had in their region. They needed to work together, and they needed to pull all EMS services together and not just look at county lines. And they came up with this Disaster Assistance Response Team, or DART, and they approached the Commission for funding for this project. We were very impressed with it. The EMS community, the EMS subcommittee was impressed, and we funded that. That's different than other regions because it's specific to their regions. So with these regional formations, we can actually get funding that is specific to that region, because one cookie cutter region won't work for everything. In other words, what works in Atlanta won't work in North Georgia, and vice versa. Next slide, page 11, system development. This is where some of those funds go that help us form the RTACs that I just mentioned, or Regional Trauma Advisory Committees. I just mentioned those. We're also working with rural hospitals and providing training. We actually go to their hospital and talk to them and teach them about trauma care. You'll see TQIP, which stands for Trauma Quality Improvement Program. This is another feather for Georgia. What this is, there's about 350 trauma centers in the country that look at their data, look at their outcomes, and then look at best practices and say, how can we do things better, and get that out to all trauma centers. I'm happy to say that Georgia is only the second state in the country, behind Michigan, that have all level 1 and level 2 trauma centers with this software and with this ability to analyze their data. We're so cutting edge with this is that we are actually helping the American, when I say we, Georgia, the Commission and the trauma centers, are helping the American College of Surgeons develop their state reports, because we're the first state other than Michigan and us are working on it, to actually have state reports. So this is very exciting. The Georgia Medical Reserve Corps, Dr. John Harvey from the Medical Association of Georgia came to the Commission and wanted to form sort of an emergency disaster team. What happens, there's a lot of doctors that would like to volunteer and do, and they show up at a disaster somewhere in Georgia, if we had one, and then they're not credentialed. So how can you practice in a hospital? They don't know anything about you. You say you're a doctor, you're a surgeon, they have no idea what your skill set is. So the idea is that we'll have a group of doctors that are already credentialed statewide. They'll have their badges, their uniforms, they'll be ready to go at a moment's notice. So we're starting down that road and plan on funding that. That hasn't been voted on yet, but that's my anticipation. And then finally there, the resource availability to screen, which if you go to the next page with all the colorful jelly beans on there, we did a pilot project that was about 2.5 years long, where we put a command center in Forsyth, Georgia, at the Georgia Public Training Safety Center, and we fielded calls from EMS. We also fielded calls from hospitals, and basically this screen that you see lists on the y-axis up and down all the trauma centers in the state, and across the top those are all the service lines, such as ICU, trauma surgery, orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, ICU availability, and basically this screen is updated with those trauma centers every 8 hours. It's the best data in the state as far as knowing what's going on, because it's real time. If the hospitals don't update, they get a call and it's updated. And so what that allows is that you know who's hot, who's not. If you're trying to decide, if you're green, you can take a patient, you have that service. If you're yellow, it's questionable, it's cautionary. If you're red, you're overwhelmed. Black means that you never had that service. So at the end of that pilot study, we discussed all this with the trauma centers, non-trauma centers, EMS services, and what we found is that folks didn't really need to call. What they wanted was this data. So now we've put this in an iCloud format or a web-based format to where every hospital emergency room, every EMS dispatch center can have access to this screen. It's free. not anything, I guess nothing's free, but basically it's provided through your funding, through the commission and the taxpayers ultimately, so that all the healthcare providers can have access to this screen, and they can decide very quickly where the resources are and make their decisions. So we're moving, which is a cost savings, moving to a web-based program, removing the human factor. We're able to do this in a much leaner fashion. This has transpired into the next slide, 13, where we have posters that have been sent out to every hospital in Georgia in the ER to help those non-trauma centers know when to transfer a trauma patient, what things to look for, and when to get them out of the emergency room very quickly. So this has gone out. This has been signed on by all the trauma medical directors of all the trauma centers, and a letter went out with a poster to post in their ER. This is the new version. They don't have this version right now. This will be going out shortly. Then finally, you see on the Georgia, next slide, 14, the Georgia Trauma Foundation. I won't go over all that, but this is the foundation that is really responsible for research, trauma prevention, trauma education, and has the ability to go out and work with the private sector to bring funds into the trauma system to help do those things. Now, as I end here on slide 15 to show you that map that the Madam Chair pointed out, that we have a gap in South Georgia. Where have we come and where are we going? I'll sort of sum up the whole talk and the whole last few years in just a few slides. Number one, this is a map of Georgia now that has 50-mile concentric circles around each trauma center. You can see everything in North Georgia. Central Georgia is blue. We have that pretty well covered with the trauma centers that we've brought on in the last few years. But again, down in that southern part of the state, you see we still have a gap. And we've identified those hospitals that we identified that could help out if they would join the trauma center or all in that area. And so we'll continue to work. We've made tremendous improvements, and a huge thank you to you, the legislators, for providing the funding and letting us move in that direction. We understand we still have gaps, though, and we'll keep working. So we know that we've increased the number of trauma centers. So now the question is, are we getting folks to those trauma centers? If you look at the blue line, and this is from 2003 all the way to 2012, and it looks at critically injured patients, very severely injured patients. You see the blue line was sort of stuck at about 65%. It was sort of flat until you, the legislators, got involved in about 2008 and started providing consistent funding. And look what happened to that line. The blue line, in 2009, it was 63 or 64%. It's been on a steady incline up until 2012, up to 84%. So we've had a 20% increase in access to critically injured patients going to trauma centers based on increasing the number of trauma centers, increasing education, better EMS, and ultimately better funding. If you look at the red line, it's up around, that's children, that's up around 97, 98%. So we've increased the number of trauma centers. We're providing better access, getting patients to those trauma centers. And then the next question you would ask as a legislator, and we've been asked, okay, are you saving lives? Does that make a difference? What's the return on our investment? Well, we actually looked at that. We've had national data for years now that show that there's increased survival with major trauma when you're treated at a trauma center versus a non-trauma center. We've never had Georgia data. We've never been able to be sophisticated enough to evaluate our Georgia trauma system. We are now, and I'm happy to say that this shows that data. If you look here, the red line are patients that are treated at a designated trauma center. The dotted line is the blue line that are non-trauma centers, and if you calculate all that out, it comes out across the board where you're least critical, intermediate critical, or most critical. Your chance of survival at a trauma center is 10% higher than a non-trauma center for critical injuries. So we now have Georgia data that show our trauma centers are making a difference. As far as discharge home, here the trauma centers are the blue line, And these are the ability to discharge patients straight home as opposed to going to nursing homes or rehab for catastrophic injuries. And again, there's an increased incidence of discharging directly home if you could go to a trauma center first. And you might ask, well, that's great for patients, and we appreciate that, but what does that have to do with me as a legislator? Remember, you provide the Medicaid funding, so if we get them out the door quicker, if we get them home, then that's less Medicaid dollars for those folks that are on Medicaid that need to go to nursing home or rehab or more sophisticated or complicated care, if we can get them well and out the door quicker. Finally, the last question, or not the last question, this will be a lifetime work. I mean, the trauma system will never be perfect. It will always need to be evaluated and tweaked. But the question that we're working on now, we know that we've increased the number of trauma centers. We know that we're getting patients there. We know that when we get them there, they have a 10% increase in survival. So the question we're asking now, how long does it take us to get them there? If it takes 8 hours, that's too long. And I don't know that number. I can't give you that number today. We're trying to work through databases and work on projects to figure out how to get that data. But that's the next thing we want to ask. How long does it take to get there, and what can we do? If that number is too long, what can we do to shorten that number? So this has all come together in our state trauma plan, finally working with the Department of Public Health and the Office of EMS and Trauma. Dr. Pat O'Neill and Renee Morgan summed all this up and wrote the state plan. This was presented to the commission in March of 2014. And I'm happy to say now that Georgia does have a robust trauma plan that's tied into each region. I'll end there. I like to end with this slide because after presenting a lot of numbers and graphs, this is what keeps me going. This is why we do what we do. It brings it back to the patient. This is a happy trauma patient from Georgia, actually from our trauma center, one of our employees that got hit by a car one day while out jogging. He's was very thankful for his care and provided us this thank you note. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for what you do, and I thank you for bearing with me while I got through all that data. Thank you.
No, and thank you for your work on the Trauma Commission and away from patients. Do we have any questions that are just for Shane, correct, Ashley? Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Ashley, especially, I think, for the new members of the committee to see the plan where you can tell what services are offered at each hospital, who is closed down because being overloaded with patients, who is okay to take patients there. You won't remember it if you're new to the committee, but we had a severely injured state employee. The airplane lifted off thinking that they would have them at care in 20 minutes. While they were in the flight, they were told that that hospital was on diversion. That plane stayed in the air for a long time, couldn't find another place to take the patient. That patient died. So I think it looks like we've solved a lot of that problem, and certainly, hopefully, that will never happen again because of having just that very system that you've got up now. So I appreciate it very much. I hope any legislators from South Georgia will be talking to Phoebe Putney about coming into the trauma center. It does, the hospitals do have to outlay a good portion of money to get a trauma center up and going, but it's also beneficial to them because if you've got a neurosurgeon on staff and all these other things, it certainly, I would think, add to the status of your hospital and to the services you could ask. So thank you, Dr. Ashley. Who's the kid? Who? Representative Kidd. Well, just briefly.
Obviously, the trauma center dispatches a emergency helicopter to pick people up and fly them back to a trauma center or the closest hospital by choice, whatever else. Is that correct?
But we have to turn it on.
I had a little trouble hearing you there. Was something about a helicopter and
y'all dispatch a helicopter to the location of an accident, or somebody needs a helicopter to transport them back to a trauma center or hospital and so forth. How does the state or y'all bill for that helicopter time, that flight time?
Well, some trauma centers have a helicopter, some don't. Most of the helicopters are stationed like in South Georgia, they have a few helicopters that are stationed that are manned or private companies. They're not necessarily associated with any trauma center. And they work with their local EMS regions and hospitals to be called and get those patients out. So there's not really a central dispatch center that you just call and all of a sudden a helicopter shows up. A lot of it's locally driven. So the answer to your question is sort of multifactorial in the sense that there's a lot of answers to your question. It's done a lot of different ways.
Well, what would you think, well, I'll answer a different way. If a helicopter had to fly 90 miles to pick up somebody and fly 90 miles back to the hospital, would the reasonable cost be $28,000?
That I don't really know the answer to because I don't actually run a helicopter service, nor does the commission run any of the helicopter services. So all the data that I provided, I don't know. In our hospital, we're a trauma center. I work my daytime job. My real job is trauma director at the medical center in Macon, which is a level 1 trauma center. We have a helipad, but we don't actually have a helicopter. The private companies fly to us from South Georgia. So I'm not really sure what the costs are for the flights.
The reason I ask that because I know of 2 cases in my county where the helicopter left Atlanta, went to Baldwin County, picked up somebody, brought them back to Atlanta, and the bill was $26,000, $28,000, which to me seems a little exorbitant.
Yeah,
Well,
I can understand.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Yes, ma'am.
Lucinda Kidd, I thought you were going to say that that's how much it cost to pick you up from your motorcycle accident, and I was going to say you were worth every penny of it. So, okay. So thank you, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Senator Kirk here? Moving along. Okay. I forgot. You're a senator now. Jeez. Okay. Senator Kirk and Senate Bill 53.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
briefly, Senator, because
Okay. Senate Bill 53 is one pager. I made it as simple as possible. All we're doing is extending the sunset clause that was on Senate Bill 65 that passed last year. This is important because there's a collaboration going on between the Department of Behavioral Health, the Sheriff's Association, and the Licensed Professional Counselors Association of Georgia. What this bill did last year was allow licensed professional counselors to see people and sign the 1013 form if they felt like they needed evaluation for committal. The Department of Behavioral Health was having problems staffing their crisis teams before this law went into effect last year. So I'm just simply asking for an extension of that sunset clause through June 30th of 2018.
okay. Senator, refresh my memory. The reason we're having to do this and why it was sunsetted is the Sheriff's Association was afraid that there would be a drastic increase in the number of people they had to transport, and they haven't. So far, they don't have the data to see where that's increased, and they've asked for this 3-year extension.
That's correct.
And they're in support of it, give the extension.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
I have a question.
Okay.
Senator, good to see you.
Yeah, you
An
too.
old friend. Isn't it true that, as we are moving more and more towards getting people out of state institutions, having these LPCs in the community, has that been helpful to us with the crisis teams that we have now in the community that I know that we work with? We have to really depend on those guys, and so we're moving more and more to community-based services with so many of these individuals. Is this helpful in that regard as well?
It is, and the problem was the CSBs were having problems staffing those positions, and once this law passed, there were enough LPCs around the state to fill those positions. So yes, that's been very beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Berry is very supportive of this as well.
Representative Harden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's the appropriate time, I'd
like to make a motion to pass.
It's appropriate time, so we have a motion to do pass. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Do we have any discussion from the committee? No discussion in the committee. I know we had a couple of people that wanted to testify. If you're testifying in favor, because we're in a time bind, can you stand up at your place, Gail Mackey, and tell us if you're in favor or against?
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Is that all you need?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Sonia Sutherland?
Yes, ma'am. I'm in favor as well.
Okay, in favor also? Okay, thank you very much. So there's no discussion from the committee. We've had a motion and a second. Everyone in favor of Senate Bill 53, say aye. Aye. Everyone opposed? No? You have it, Senator, with a
Thank you,
favorable
Madam Chair.
pass.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I see Representative Weldon come in? Oh, I know he left, okay. All right, I'm going to present my bill. Okay, House Bill 195 is the biosimilar bill. The bill passed out with unanimously out of this committee. It got to rules, so the committee will know what happened. And a very unusual thing happened. Somebody brought up a concern that had not been brought up before in the committee or at any time with the chairman, which I'm sure none of y'all would ever do. You would always go to the chairman or talk about it before the committee. And so the rules chairman sent it back and said for me to work it out. We have worked it out, and here are the changes that brought that up are on page 4. Line 98 that says that the Pharmacy Audit Bill of Rights shall apply to biological products and interchangeable biological products dispensed pursuant to this code section. This was already the law. It covered the biologics, but to make some of our pharmacists feel better and more secure, we have added it here. Since we were making that change, the hospitals had also been talking to me about a change. If the biological or the interchangeables are going to be changed in the hospital setting, the hospital pharmacists were exempt from the, labeling and so forth. Well, there also could be an outpatient setting that's in the hospital where patients are administered, like in a cancer center. So starting on line 60 on page 2, and going through line 63 are the changes we made, and the Hospital Pharmacy Association are agreeable to that, and the other people involved in the drug. Is there any questions from members of the committee? If not, I will entertain a motion. Representative Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I move do pass by substitute House Bill 195, LC 335990S.
Good. We have a motion, and do I hear a second? Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Is there anybody on this one? Anybody? Any further discussion? Okay. Nobody? No further discussion. There's no one in the audience that want to address it. So everyone in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. Okay, the ayes have it, and the substitute to House Bill 195 is passed. Okay. Representative Weldon. Okay, well, I've been working with Representative Weldon on this bill, so I told him he's in an appropriations meeting, and I told him that I would do this for him. When we did the pain pill bill last year, I worked very closely with Representative Weldon on that. And we were very restrictive about what could happen in pain clinics and who had to be available if certain things were going to occur. Well, it was brought to our attention that nurse anesthetists work a little differently, and that, they don't always have to have a certain patient available to do some of their services. And so this is the language to striking part of the language that was here before, and adding a amendment that I'm going to read to you will allow nurse anesthetists to work in the pain clinics in accordance with their practice, standards of practice. So to the end of line 14, I would like to add the following amendment. Betsy, you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. For the purposes of this article, dispensing shall not include the administering of anesthesia pursuant to a physician's order. For the purpose of this article, dispensing shall not include the administering of an anesthesia pursuant to a physician's order. I mean, you see the word dispense, that usually means that drugs, you're giving people drugs. However, in one part of our law, it's a little questionable that could concern administering drugs. And this is what has been worked out to clarify that for the nurse anesthetist. Answer any questions. He's 29. Representative Kidd.
Madam Chair, I know you've worked on this and so forth. I don't know how many people on this committee have been to a quote-unquote pain clinic. I know we passed some legislation a couple of years ago to try to get rid of some of the quote-unquote pain clinics on I-75 and people coming up from Florida, which was successful. My experience, and those from a lot of people that I know, a lot of the pain clinics are really, that are existing today, that are legal today, that are MD staffed, so to speak, or MD owned, are really nothing more than a legal prescription mill. And I would like to find some way to get a handle on some of those. And I would definitely like to make sure that if someone other than the medical doctor cannot write a prescription for oxycodone or a controlled substance drug or whatever, unless the practitioner is on the premises. Because you could have a brand new patient come in, never have been seen by a medical doctor, and somebody start writing oxycodone prescription to them or whatever else. And the medical doctor have never seen them. I might not be saying it the right way, but I really, really am sincere that, in my opinion, that the vast majority of these quote-unquote pain clinics are run by medical doctors, anesthesiologists who lost their contract with a hospital and now they've opened up a prescription mill. And I don't know how to get a handle on them other than at least say, their staff can't write a prescription unless they're there.
Representative Kidd, I'm trying to bring up from my memory the parameters of that bill. I mean, this is not the time to do it, but the Attorney General worked very closely with us on that pain clinic bill, and I know that for Representative Weldon, that's a big issue in shutting these down, and the same as with me. I'll be glad to go back and review that and talk to you, and also I can have the medical, a representative from the medical board come over and tell me the rules they put into place, and we can see if there is some area just like this that where we can tighten it.
I don't have a problem working with it as it goes through the process, but I think if any of y'all go back and talk to people who've been to a pain clinic, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, I have no problem with looking at.
I've been from Shepherd Center on down to a whole bunch of them in the last 6 months, and that's my personal experience, and those are the people that I know.
Okay, I have no problem with looking if there's a simple fix to that we can get people on board with. I'll look at that, and if it's larger, I'll be glad to entertain that. Of course, at this time of the year, right, Representative Broadwood, do you have something to add to that about how it's done?
Of course, the parameters that the pain management clinics operate under are under the composite board rules and are inspected, therefore. And I think Representative Weldon's sort of addressing that somewhat here, that protocol, that the physician has to be on staff.
You think it'll tighten it up some?
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay.
And then also, could we entertain a motion to accept the amendment?
Hold on a second. Representative Henson last. Okay. Representative Henson, did you have a question?
Yes. I was trying to understand the amendment that was put out there and that you read. And if I understand correctly, the purpose is to say that if the doctor has ordered it, a nurse anesthetist could administer, and yet
A type of anesthesia.
a type of anesthesia.
Not pills, but a type, something
Right,
that's used
I'm
in
hearing
anesthesia.
that. But yet it's saying no. I mean, the way that it's worded, it almost sounds like it's saying the opposite, and that's what I was trying to get an understanding
Let
of.
me ask Betsy. Betsy, is there a problem?
No, the bill is saying that no controlled substance can be dispensed when a physician or PA or APRN is on site, but then we're carving out of dispense this administering anesthesia if it was prescribed by a doctor's order. So in other words, a CRNA could do this in a pain management clinic when there wasn't one of those other healthcare professionals on site.
So it is worded correctly, Betsy?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, but thank you for checking that, Representative Hensy. Okay, Representative Broderick, I'll entertain a motion to accept the amendment.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we accept the amendment as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Not, the amendment passes. Now, I'm ready for the committee's movement on the bill. Oh, we have some people that want to talk on it? Oh, okay. Sorry, we have one person, Dr. Gale. We've lost Dr. Gale. Oh, there we go. Okay.
With these said changes, we withdraw our comments at this point in time. However, I would simply like to find out what exactly we struggle with these definitions, anesthesia services versus prescribing pills versus doing interventional procedures, and it all gets blended together. I think it's tough for all of you folks to get a grasp on it. This is what I do every day. If anybody wants to ask me real life, what a real life board certified interventional pain doctor does, and although there may be people out in certain areas that just write out prescriptions, I can assure you, after driving an hour and a half over here from North Bartow County, which is kind of rural, we don't do that. But there are certain people that may need certain prescriptions, but we do this under a logical, in a very well thought out pattern that really takes a lot of expertise, so people aren't just simply out there writing prescriptions for people to do whatever they want. So the committee really wants to, if they have any unsurety as to what do you guys really do, I left my practice earlier today to kind of be here to ask that. And I want the committee, if you guys, I'm not a politician, I don't know what everybody does afterwards, if you all get back together and re-talk about things, but when I hear about additional language going into a bill that we spent so much time and effort into implementing, and now a different group of people, in this case the CRNAs, want additional nebulous language, we just want to do our services. I don't know what our services are, and that definition, it'd be, I was hoping one of their representatives would come up here and say, what is it? Do you just want to start an IV and give anesthesia so people can be relaxed while a doctor is doing procedures? If that's what it is, I think the Georgia Code already allows for that. I just didn't know if there were other things, or if they were interested in what you were saying, Representative, of yet another person now being able to write prescriptions, where the original bill decreased the number of people who were able to write prescriptions for OxyContin or what have you.
Dr. Yates, let me tell you, first of all, the nurse anesthetist, and I think their representative is here, they do not write prescriptions for narcotics. And to be
Right. So I was kind of wondering exactly, now that the person is here, what services that they provide, just kind of on record, does this bill not allow them to do? Because we would love to work out language. We just want to find out what the parameters are.
Okay.
And anybody else in the committee has an interest as to what we really do for a living, I'm happy to answer that.
You know, Dr. Gade, you're with the Georgia Society of Interventional Pain Physicians?
Correct, and I'm also the Medicare representative for pain manager for the state of Georgia.
Okay, are you represented by a lobbyist? Are you, Mr. Tony, is he your?
And Ms. Hayden, Ms. Chandler Hayden.
Okay.
And we also work closely with Mr. Jet Tony as well.
Okay. I mean, I know that Jet and Hayden have worked very carefully on this language and approved it, so they have been looking after your interest and the interest of patients across the state of Georgia. It is not the language that was first introduced by the bill. It's been where they think is very narrowed. And if a further discussion of you thinking maybe some group shouldn't do something or some group should do something, that would be a scope discussion and is not appropriate at this time, but we'll be glad if you want to bring it up, I'll talk to you anytime, or with any of these groups, not just the nurse anesthetists.
Right. No, we aren't even talking about that. I was just kind of curious what language, what part of the bill is not allowing nurse anesthetists to do what they already do. And that just might help us going forward.
Well,
and that's all. That was my only comment.
And I hope that they will explain that to you.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have them, come up on record and say that.
Only because we are really in a bind. There are several really important things go. Would I, hold it up? Thank you. Okay. Are there any? Where are we? Are there any other questions from members of the committee?
Yes.
I got a question to the chair. I'm not sure what we're doing now with this bill. Since the nurse anesthetists are been taken out, aren't we just restating law here?
No, the nurse anesthetists were putting them in. They were left out.
Yeah, from the original bill. So now you're reinserting on line 14? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't catch that.
I mean, well,
Sorry.
it was what happened by striking the parts of line 11 that are struck. That allows them to do what they can do under their, it's not a protocol, it's scope of practice.
Scope of practice.
In a pain clinic.
Okay.
Okay? They were left off to be able to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay, from the original bill when we did this, a couple years ago. Okay.
And then we got into and found a discrepancy in our law where one thing about dispensing also includes the administration, so we had to clarify that.
I got that part. The bill I signed is different than the bill I'm looking at now.
That's right, and that's
right.
because of the changes that were brought up.
Right, good. Okay, good.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Everybody got it? Okay. Pleasure of the committee. Right. Okay, I have a motion that we accept the substitute to House Bill 212 as amended. Do I have a second? Second. Okay, I've got a second. Everyone in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we have the passage of the substitute to House Bill 212. Thank you. And if anybody needs any clarification, Betsy can clarify it for you, or I'm sure Mr. Tony and Hayden, will y'all stay and explain if any of the members have any questions and, the representative for them. Thank you. Okay. We are to House Bill 34. Representative Dudgeon, if you'd like to come forward and have a seat at the table. Oh, there's no what? There's no mic at the table. Sorry.
We'll go here.
You're on your own standing. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I've been standing. I like it. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure, my fifth year in the legislature, to finally come for the Health Committee.
You can shut
I introduced my guest here, Kurt Altman, who's a policy expert on this issue with a Goldwater student in Phoenix. So he's here to answer if there's any really detailed technical questions. So House Bill 34 is known as the right to try legislation. This is passed in 5 states and is being talked about in 29 others for this year. This bill really has one basic purpose, which is to allow the voluntary access to FDA safety-approved medications or therapies to those people with terminal illness. And I want to make some key points because I think this is very important. The entire process is voluntary. No one is coerced. The doctor has to agree, the patient has to agree. There is a very well thought out written consent form. There has to be no other option available that's already approved to the patient. This would be a patient with no other viable options. The manufacturers are not required to offer this treatment. The doctors are not required to do it. And the insurers are not required to pay. Again, this is a 100% voluntary procedure. No one in this business is being forced to do anything. We have worked very carefully with the doctors groups, hospitals group, the Composite Medical Board, talked to the drug companies, and also the attorneys, the trial lawyers. And all those groups are neutral on the bill. There are no opposition other than we did spend about 6 weeks trying to work out some liability language between the doctors and the MAG and the trial lawyers. And unfortunately, we're not able by the time of the hearing to get language worked out. I've told the parties I'm very open as the bill moves forward to looking for that language. But the liability language is included in the bill is the one suggested by MAG and the doctors groups because they wanted to make sure that if they had an issue where they prescribed an experimental treatment, they wanted to make sure that they were not going to be held liable for prescribing experimental treatment, and we've tried to make that language reflect that. Again, everyone is also indemnified during the process, so that hopefully nobody is going to get in trouble for this. And here's really why you need this bill. So the question is, so why, Mike, are you bringing this bill? The FDA process right now is lengthy, bureaucratic, and inconsistent. And we believe that if you're in a terminal illness and there's a therapy that's accessible, that's been safety approved, which is very important because that means it's not just something completely out of the blue. It has gone through safety trials, but the efficacy trials, as you well know, can take 6 to 10 years. And if you're going to die, we do not believe that you should be denied access to that possibly life-saving treatment, or we don't believe you have to be so wealthy that you would have to be able to fly to Singapore or someplace like that. We want to bring this to the United States. There are debatable issues with attorneys about how much federal preemption this is. There's been a variety of court cases. Kurt can answer members' questions about that, but there's a variety of court cases that say that this is maybe a little bit of a federal preemption issue, but not really that much of one. The reality is that so far in the states where they've done this, that the FDA and the federal government is not really looking at this something they want to really get involved with. But what we want to do is make a statement, and we want to say that a Georgian who has a terminal illness, who has no other access to a therapy or anything that the doctors know of that's approved that's going to save their life, that it was an experimental opportunity that's available. They can't get into a clinical trial because that can be very tough. If that's the only option available, you want to say to that Georgian, you have the right for your own life, you have the right to choose your own therapy. So at that time, Madam Chair, I'll be glad to answer questions for the committee. And I am working hopefully from sub 335953S.
Okay. Okay, Representative Drenner.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, there you are.
Representative Dudgeon, can you explain what you mean when you say no other options available?
Yeah, the language is on line 38 through 40, actually 41. And so advanced illness, and it says is not considered to be treating position to be reversible even with the administration of current federal Food and Drug Administration approved and available treatments, and that without life-sustaining procedures will soon result in death. So what that's saying is there's not already a 100% all the way through the process drug that's available or therapy that's available that would reverse the terminal illness. So that's the no other option.
Okay, let me just ask specifically. Sure. So you have cancer.
Yes.
And you're on chemotherapy right now.
Yes.
And you've decided that you don't want to go through any more chemotherapy because for whatever reason. But chemotherapy could be a viable treatment option for you. At that juncture, when you make the decision, can you then opt in to what your bill would allow?
I think that'd be an interesting judgment call. I'll ask my learned attorney to weigh in, but I think the doctor is going to have to make a decision whether he's going to sign this consent form saying that there is no other available treatment. Kurt, what would you, any comment about that?
Thank you. Madam Chair, Representative, again, my name is Kurt Altman. I am the National Policy Advisor and General Counsel at the Goldwater Institute. I was actually one of the drafters of the model legislation that this bill, HB 34, and many of the bills around the country were modeled after. I think to address your question, Representative, is the law's intent and the language basically indicates that the doctors have to have at least tried all available and approved FDA medications, or at least examined them. And by examine them means looked at them, decided they would be good or not. And when those options are exhausted, and the doctor is aware of an investigational new drug that is somewhere within the clinical trial testing process beyond phase 1, which is the safety testing, that this doctor may think is a better option for the patient, it is at that point that that patient becomes eligible with the consent of the doctor and the manufacturer to try one of these investigational new drugs.
Representative Joyner, does that answer your question?
Not really, but, okay. And the reason that I'm saying not really is because we all know people that have had cancer, and at a certain point in their treatment, there's a choice between where you want the next, what do you want to do next? And I guess I just want to make sure that in the bill that there is the flexibility to allow the patient to decide that if they want to go down the investigational new drug path, that they can do that.
I think that's where we try to make the language a little bit of discretion for the doctor. I mean, we made it very clear it has to be a fatal illness, and the treating physician has got to make a recommendation that's not reversible. He may believe that the chemotherapy only has a 10% chance of success, and therefore it's more probable to try the other experimental therapy. We tried to keep the bill, I wouldn't say narrow, but we wanted to keep it so that we wanted to be very clear that it was about terminal illness, and if you're opening up these avenues, that we just wanted to make sure that the other ones were considered first. And I'd be open to the language to work on that, Representative Joyner. I don't have it today, but I mean, I in spirit agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Representative Broderick.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my questions are answered in lines 45. The investigational drug would have gone through to the point of phase 1. This is
absolutely
pre-clinical trials, but the investigational drug would be in the process of being marketed for an indication for which the patient is being treated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
It's got to be through phase 1 trials. And then obviously it's in the clinical efficacy trials at that point. So does it indicate about an off-label, on-label? It doesn't talk about that. No.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me see if I understand this right.
Yeah.
The drug would have been through a safety phase.
That's right.
Which says that it's not contaminated or whatever, and that. And it would, in phase 1, been given to usually a few well patients. Sometimes a few sick patients, but it's a very limited number. Am I correct? So that's what it would have been through. Usually it's only given to a few well patients.
I'll let Kurt address that. That's all right, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sure you know more than I do.
Madam Chair, Representative Broderick, as you're aware, the FDA approval process has 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is exactly what you indicated, Madam Chair. It is a safety test phasing where there is a limited number of subjects, anywhere from 80 to maybe 200 at the most, depending on the drug. And and they are sick as well.
Sick.
And what is examined in phase 1 is if the drug by itself is going to cause great harm. Is the drug going to kill the patient? Once it's completed that phase, it goes on to phase 2 and phase 3, which are more side effect and efficacy testing, which takes years and years. The requirement in this bill and all the bills around the country are that the investigational new drug to be eligible would have had to pass phase 1. In other words, it's been determined safe and still remain in clinical testing. So it's still somewhere within the phase 2 or phase 3 process of the FDA's approval process. And the reason that was done, that ensures, for lack of a better term really, that this is a legitimate drug, that it is a drug that a company is literally spending millions and sometimes billions of dollars to research and put through these trials, and is something that still remains in that testing phase. If for some reason it falls out of the clinical trials, doesn't pass one, or the company simply takes it out and stops the trials, then the drug is no longer eligible under these right-to-try laws.
Okay, Representative Broderick, that
answers my question, and the drug would be in the parameter of the indication for which you treat the patient.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Dunn, on lines 107 through 111, can you explain that to me, please?
Yes, and my friends in the insurance industry talked to me actually today on the road since they've been okay with this. That basically is permissive but not requiring language for insurance companies. It basically says if the insurance company wants to pay for this or a health benefit plan, that's great. If you look at the second part of it, nothing in this chapter is construed to require the plan to pay for it. We wanted to make it very clear that this is not mandating anything on an insurance company, but it doesn't mandate them not to pay for it if they wanted. They may decide in some hypothetical case that it might be better to do that than the end-of-life care that's coming next or whatever.
Further question, Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
On lines 135 through 136, can you explain that to me, please?
What, I'm sorry, Representative Rogers, 135?
135 through 136.
Basically, we're saying this is a parallel process to clinical trials. It doesn't affect anything in the law about clinical trials because this is not a clinical trial. So we're just making clear this law does not complicate the clinical trial process. That's my understanding from Legislative Council when we did this.
Representative Petra.
Representative Dudgeon, I assume that this would only pertain to patients of sound mind, correct? So when you have guardianship, a guardian would not be able to choose this path, correct?
Well, the language on 51 says signed by patient, parent, or patient and minor, legal guardian, or healthcare agent, doesn't have by the patient an advance directive. So it does cover sort of your standard. I think it'd be the same set of people in a healthcare setting who have that medical power of attorney, lack of a better word, to make those decisions. So that's 51 through 53. I would certainly hope that they're in sound state of mind. The consent is pretty, the consent goes on for, 20, 30 lines on purpose, because we want to make sure that no one would go into this without having a full knowledge of what's happening.
And you mentioned no cost to, another question, so no cost to government in any way, Medicaid here in Georgia is not going to do, this is all voluntary?
Correct.
And I have to tell you, as a healthcare provider of long-term care,
Yeah.
I mean, trust me, I see the need, and I'm all about people having the right to choose
Yes.
the resources they need in the community, so
Yeah,
thank you.
we went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that everything is voluntary, no one is coerced, and that's why the different healthcare groups who've weighed in have, believe me, they would have told me if there was any mandates in here.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, just a clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
In understanding this bill, in lines 123 through 132, it actually is a indemnification and release of liability on manufacturer, physician,
Yes.
as well as family, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then section B after that is a separate one that's very targeted towards the healthcare providers, and I know that the second one is the one where the Georgia Trial Lawyer Association is not 100% agreed on that language.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Chokas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Dungeon, I'm trying to be serious with this question as well.
Okay.
How would this legislation be looked at in light if Alan Peake's legislation passes?
I don't think it has anything to do with the medical cannabis oil, to my knowledge, because unless I'm wrong, are any of those illnesses under there? I guess the new standard thing that could be a fatal illness. But that hasn't gone through Part 1 trials yet, if I'm correct. Is that right?
No, Representative Trocas, I would have had much opposition to the cannabis bill that was presented last year if it had been up through phase 1, because we would have known at least it had been tested on some children and that it was safe and didn't have bacteria and E. coli and all the things that marijuana can have on it. So it would have nothing to do with this because it's not in any kind of trials, FDA trials like it.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Harden? Representative Harden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a follow-up question to Chairman Rogers' question.
Yes, sir.
You have given the ability for an insurance company to pay for this, and if they so desire.
Yes, sir.
Does your indemnity of liability cover the insurance company? Because I can see where if an insurance company decided to pay for it, they might be the target of some type of suit. If it doesn't, can you change that indemnity to also include them?
I certainly would not be at all objection to that, Representative Harding. If I'm reading it on line 124, private cause of action against a manufacturer or against any other person or entity involved in the care of the eligible patient. The attorneys would have to tell me whether an insurance company is an entity involved in that care, and I don't know if Ms. Howerton or Kurt here would have an opinion on that. As not an attorney, I don't know, but I am wide open to, if we need to strengthen that language for insurance companies, I'm totally happy to do that.
Well, Representative Dudgeon, okay, do you have another one?
No, thank you.
Okay. I have a question for your guest.
Sure.
In reading this, and I think in your folder, there is an article that's just come out recently where the FDA, they used to send and ask the doctors for 28 different pages of information or something, and they are 28 points, and they've shortened that to a very manageable type of application. The patient wants to do this. And they are turning around the replies, whether yay or nay, they qualify in a very short period of time. This is out for conversation right now. So if you have to have FDA approval for this, and what I'm hearing from most of the drug companies is they wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole if they did not have an okay from the FDA, the patient didn't have an okay, because that would put at jeopardy their research and their other drugs. What benefit is the state, which, federal law overrides ours, of moving this type of bill except to send a message, which obviously it has because the FDA has responded by shortening their application process?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can address all those points. First, the process that you're talking about isn't the clinical trial process. It's what's called expanded access or compassionate use, which is a current process that the FDA has where terminally ill patients that do not qualify for clinical trials, because clinical trials only take 3% of the people that are afflicted with whatever condition that drug's being under trials for. So people that do not qualify for clinical trials can apply to the FDA for what's called expanded access or compassionate use to have this investigational new drug administered to them. Up until what you were addressing, Madam Chairman, about a week ago, the process to apply for expanded access took a doctor, by the FDA's own literature, took a doctor over 100 man-hours to fill out the paperwork. And as you said, Madam Chair, there were many exhibits, many addendums that needed to be supplied with that.
Hold on just a minute. Mike, do you want to try to suspend for just about 15 minutes so we can go vote?
To do what? Oh, yeah, because I'm being paged by...
We're being paged and I'm being paged for a vote. Can the committee hold for about 15 minutes and just take a break, and we can still, like that? We have a DOT vote.
And I'm being paid by every single member of the
thing.
congressional district.
Can we just take a break for about 15 minutes? Okay, good. Okay, can we call the meeting back to order? We said 15 minutes, and Mike tells me we were pretty much on the dot. And we have a new DOT board member for the 6th District. It's former Speaker Pro Tem Mark Burkhalter. So, on one ballot. And so if we can take your seats and we can call the meeting back to order. Are any of our committee members out in the hallways or anything? Okay, and so they can... can we... Where's the staff? Miss Deborah, we have a committee member that wants a drink. Oh, wait a minute. What kind of drink? Oh, you're talking about that kind of drink. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't drink, so I'm taking Diet Coke, whatever. Sorry. Representative Randall, you just got me in trouble.
Not me.
Well, that's so. Okay, thank you to the committee members that stayed. We appreciate it. We're sorry to have to break like that. We'll see if anybody else comes back in. Okay, will you go back to explaining to us again why we need this? If the FDA is shortening the term and they still have to have FDA approval to be able to get the drugs, and the drug companies are afraid to give it without FDA approval.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you. Welcome back. What I was saying was, what you were asking about, Madam Chair, is what we call the Expanded Access Program. And up until a proposed, and I stress that, proposed rule change of about 2 weeks ago in the FDA, the portion of paperwork that just the physician has to fill out, and I stress that just the physician, this isn't the whole process, took over 100 hours according to the FDA. So therefore, there are very little applications that were completed. It's just impossible for a treating physician who's in this business with lots of patients to be able to take the time to do that. So it was very rare. A couple weeks ago, the FDA proposed a rule change, and they said, listen, we recognize that this takes a long time for physicians to fill out. We're going to reduce that 100-plus hour. We're going to propose a rule that reduces that 100-plus hour process down to 45 minutes. And therefore, everybody will get access quicker, but that's really not the case. Certainly, that's a step in the right direction. The FDA hasn't changed rules or really changed at all in 40 years. So this is a start. That's fantastic, and I applaud that. However, the process for expanded access is more than that. Once that application gets from the doctor to the FDA has to receive paperwork and application materials and lots of information from the manufacturer. Once all the paperwork, we'll just call it paperwork for ease of conversation, is there, the FDA, by their own rules, has 30 days to make a decision on whether to approve the access to this drug or not. If they have any question, the FDA, if an I's not dotted, a T's not crossed, or they just have legitimate questions, that paperwork goes back to the respective physician and manufacturer, and the process starts over again, and their 30-day clock starts over again. So once the process is completed there at the FDA, and let's say the FDA's gotten everything, they've approved access to this, there's still another step in the Expanded Access Program, and that's a review by what's called an institutional review board. I'm sure that Emory University has an institutional review board that reviews all clinical and experimental medication that's going to be delivered. IRBs meet periodically and on a schedule, typically 4 times a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. So if the FDA were to approve an expanded access program or request, 2 days after an institutional review board at Emory University met, it could be 4 months until they meet again, and it's not until that IRB approves this that the drug can be administered. So we really aren't shortening the process just by this proposed rule change by the FDA. It's a start. There's no doubt that it's a start, but it doesn't shorten the process significantly, and that's one of the reasons laws like this are necessary.
Okay, and for our committee members, that is the expanded access is the process that the state just went through. When we abandoned last year, right at the 1st of April, and the governor asked the medical college to apply for an expanded access for Epidiolex, the marijuana made in England, and the drug made in England, and it was approved, and they took the first patients in January. So that was April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, yeah. 10 months is what the process took on that.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, 10 months.
They took the first patients just right first about the...
Again, and under right to try, hopefully that the intent of these laws are to bring that decision to a local level between a doctor, the manufacturer, and that patient, and maybe reduce that time to, as quickly as possible, 10 weeks, 10 days, 3-4 days, much quicker than the process under the current expanded access or compassionate use program.
And I'd like to comment on that also, Madam Chair, is that I see this as a step in the process. It's not the silver bullet. I think you and I have discussed this is not a magic cure that all of a sudden a lot of terminal patients are going to have just this snowball of different options. But in some cases, it will make a difference. In some cases, it will shorten the time. In those cases, I believe it can save lives. And, we just wanted to, I think Kurt said it correctly, we want to make that decision more local and not in a sort of impersonal FDA bureaucracy.
So basically what you're saying is that some drug companies will be willing to give you their experimental drug without going through the FDA approval process.
I believe so.
I will give it. Yeah. We'll give some patient the drug without going through the FDA's approval process and take the chance that their studies might be in jeopardy.
Madam Chair, I can address that, yes, and for some practical reasons. Certainly not every company is going to do it because the FDA does have a process, and this drug that there is investigational at this point has to be qualified under right to try, has to be in the FDA approval process, as we've discussed. But many of these drugs, in practical effect, are manufactured, developed right here in America and are already in use in other parts of the world. I can tell you stories about patients and patients that have gone to England for drugs that were manufactured here, gone to Japan. So these companies are going to know that there's some efficacy out there. So yes, some companies will do that. And it's not going to damage the clinical trial testing because, one, the drug has to remain in clinical trial testing. Two, the patient has to be one of those 3%, those 97% that don't qualify typically for the clinical trial. So it's not going to take patients away from that, and it's actually going to provide potentially data in a more real-life setting where somebody has diabetes or heart disease where they wouldn't have qualified for the clinical trial, but they'll be able to get it under this.
Okay. Representative Kidd, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am, a quick question. Let's say someone's covered by, I won't say Blue Cross Blue Shield, that's a bad word in here this year, but let's say Prudential. Somebody's covered by a Prudential health care policy, and Prudential is covering for the already approved drugs for treatment. And then all of a sudden the patient says, well, I want to try these new medicines. I want to try these. And I signed all the waivers to try these. They try them for 6 months, and they say, well, now that's not really working. I want to go back to what Prudential has been paying for. And Prudential is not paying for the experimental drug because it's not required to. So now they want to go back to the approved drug, but now Prudential says they treat that going back to like a pre-existing illness and will not now cover for what the drugs they used to be taking before they tried the experimental drug. Can you address that?
I would say that that's going to be a decision made by the insurance company based on their policy. It's going to be different for any different person. I don't know what the answer is going to be to that, but let's take a step back, and we're not going to be able to cover every single possible case of things. You're trying to give options to people who have no other options than if the insurance company didn't want to pick up the standard thing. I don't know what, that's going to be some other law, not this one that will cover that. I don't know, Kurt, if you have any opinion about that. So.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Representative, and this is also, that certainly can also be part of the informed consent and the advice to the patient from the doctor. First of all, it's not necessarily just the patient's choice. This has to be a recommendation in conjunction with the doctor. The doctor has to be aware that, hey, there's this investigational new drug out there. I think it'll help you. It's the combined decision of them. So it's just not the patient that can make that. Secondly, part of the informed consent should say, and a patient should be advised that, hey, this is an investigational new drug, could cause harm, could cause you to even hasten your death, could cause a lot of things, could cause your insurance coverage not to cover the current drugs that you're taking for whatever it may be later. And then it comes down to the choice of that patient along with consultation from their physician.
Okay. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question with all the could causes, would there be a requirement for a national data bank, or how would there be accountability to the outcomes?
The accountability is really to the patient, and that's what we're trying to say here. A patient with terminal illness has no other options and is exhausted available treatment. His accountability is, what do I want with my doctor's advice to do for me? So the accountability is really there. We're not trying to do a big national database here to do that thing. I would think that, as we pointed out, that as we evolve through this process, that drug companies are going to be able to use this to get, as I said, more real-life data about the patients that are really literally in the exact situation they want to treat in order to see whether it happens. But no, we're not trying to do a national database.
Representative Jaspers.
Thank you all for being here. You know, this right to try law, I was kind of reading this since, it's in 5 states. I don't know when they were enacted or if they're being actively used by patients. So I guess our guest, I would be curious what their success has been. I mean, and how many companies are enjoining and allowing this use for these products.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative, you are correct, Representative, that 5 states passed them last session, Colorado, Louisiana, Missouri, Michigan, and then Arizona by ballot. Those, I don't have numbers today for you for people that have used it. Most of these laws have gone into effect late summer. Arizona actually went into effect January 1st, so they're very new on the books, even though they were passed last session. What I can tell you is that hospital systems, both in Arizona and Louisiana, are preparing for the use of this. Certainly hospitals have concerns when something new is coming out. They want to set protocols, procedures, and things like that. I can give you a specific example. The Verde Valley Hospital System, which is in the state of Arizona, a relatively rural hospital system, but large. It covers a large part of the rural Arizona area. There was an article about 2 weeks ago in the newspaper, them talking about their procedures and their policies that they've put in place to implement right to try laws. So can I give you statistics of people that have used it yet? No. I can tell you that there is preparations being made, and there's even preparations by physicians in Louisiana and some other places. And if I had numbers for you, I'd be running right back here with you. But we do anticipate the laws being utilized by this summer.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I guess I'm looking at this practical side of it. On the medicine, on the drug company side, on the researchers, have you seen lining up at your door, hey, we want you to pass this because we want to jump in here?
Well, I'll be straight up honest with you. I've talked to one directly, and they said they're neutral on this, that they are hesitant because of the FDA things, are a large pharmaceutical company. I think, again, that you're setting the groundwork here for something that's not going to take place maybe immediately, but 2, 3, 4 years from now, is you see things, policy progresses in a certain direction, right? And I think what we're trying to do is lay the groundwork to progress in the direction where we move that decision more local to that patient, and you'll get more manufacturers comfortable with it. And we'll also see that so far we've not, and correct me if I'm wrong, the federal government has not shown any indication they want to get involved in these states' issues, and I don't see them. I think it'd be very hard to imagine a federal agent showing up at a terminally ill patient and arresting them or fining them or something like that. And so I'm hopeful that the federal will let the states have some rights here and let the individuals have those rights. So I think we're going to move in that direction, Representative Jaspers, but I'll let Kurt comment more if he's got more.
Well, I had a question to add to Representative Jaspers, in that, okay, you don't have anybody using it yet. Is there any feeling about the number of calls, people requesting it to your institute, or?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I can certainly answer that. As far as inquiries to our institute, obviously we're not a medical institute,
right.
But inquiries, we get 10 to 15 a week, sometimes more. I'll pick up my phone sometimes when I'm in the office, which I rarely am since I'm traveling the country doing this. One last week, I picked up the phone. They said, "Kurt, this is Donna." I'm like, "I'm sorry, Donna." And yeah, I'm in New York State. I have terminal stage 4 breast cancer is right to try in our state. What can I do because I'd like to use it? Can I go somewhere else? So we get questions like that all the time from patients, and we have had contact with smaller biotech companies and even some off-the-record contact with larger companies, and everybody is, especially larger pharmaceutical companies, are sitting back, taking a neutral position, seeing how this plays out. But certainly, the momentum is building, and we do anticipate, the utilization of these laws soon.
Okay. One of the problems I have, and I talked about last year, was I have trouble giving false hopes to patients, especially patients that are terminal, or like these children that we had, being able to get this as being helpful. And I know the Children's Hospital has been inundated over the past year with calls saying, when can we get the stuff from Colorado? How much are we going to give? Are you going to give it? Are you going to have it? I mean, and it's something that's not FDA approved and put them in real bias. So I have a problem with that. I think what I'm going to do, if I know that we have a discrepancy over the legal aspect of it, so there's going to be discussion about that. It's getting late. People are saying they have to go. I think that I'm going to ask, I know we have some personal people that want to testify, any further questions from any of the committee members, and then we'll pick this back up on Monday when we have another committee meeting. That'd be okay with you, Representative Dudgeon? But I mean, certainly for to ask of our Representative Dudgeon's guest and ask any questions we have. So right now, if we could hear from, and David Hayes and Bill Clark, y'all are lobbyists. Y'all will be here, I'm sure, to fight that out. Okay, who do we have here that wanted to speak? Ed Gerasso?
Ed, he's here, yeah.
I don't know if I can get that. I don't know if you get down here or not. Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right. So I'm happy that you're allowing us to speak on behalf of Right to Try. I'm a patient with the fatal disease. I have ALS. I was diagnosed 6 years ago, and this legislation makes all the sense in the world to me because there is no cure for what I have. Right. I'm in a clinical trial at Emory, and I'm one of 30 people nationally who've had stem cells injected into my spine. And phase 1 is complete, and this would be a trial that others would be able to engage in if they wanted to pay for it. So I'm one of 30 people in the country who are part of that 3% that are in a clinical trial, but it's not open to anybody, obviously.
Right.
And it won't be FDA approved commercially for 3 years. Not to be dramatic, but in all likelihood, I won't be here in 3 years. And somebody diagnosed today may not be here in 3 years. So the idea that somebody diagnosed today wouldn't have a chance at getting the clinical trial that I'm in, those 1.5 million stem cells into my spine, that's a tragedy. I would ask you to look, all the representatives, to look at a fatal disease through the eyes of the person who has it. This isn't cancer where I'd like to do this instead of this drug over here. There is no drug for ALS. There's one FDA-approved drug, Ryliotech, and it adds 3 to 6 months to my life. That's the one 100-year total of medicine for an ALS disease. Now, a lot of people know about it, of course, because Ice Bucket challenges from Ethel Kennedy and Bill Gates and George Bush. That lots of people now know what my disease is, but it doesn't make the prognosis any better. There's a autologous stem cell trial going on in the Northeast, just like from a company called Brainstorm, just like Emory is doing with me now. And each of these trials might well be that silver bullet that has evaded us for 100 years. So I've heard a lot of talk about drug companies and Medicaid and what are they going to think. This is a patient rights issue to me. If I know that somewhere in Mass General Hospital in Boston, somebody is going through an experimental process to protect their motor neurons so they don't die, which is what happens in ALS, I'd like to know about that. I'd like to take a risk, put my own life on the line, and go to Boston and be a part of that trial. The only thing that's stopping me today, if I were this ALS patient, not somebody in a trial, is that the FDA is going to take 3 years to give me an answer. In this disease, we don't have 3 years. I may not have 2. Somebody who's diagnosed tomorrow might not have 2. So I'd ask you to look at the disease, not from a drug company point of view, they're doing fine.
No.
But for an orphan disease like mine, 30,000 people, there is no business model with only 30,000 customers. So I don't expect Big Pharma, Merck, to march in here and come up with something great for Ed Tesaro, in Alpharetta, Georgia. I mean, they've got bigger numbers to worry about. But what do I have to worry about? Nothing except me and 30,000 other patients. Give us a chance to get healed if there is something out there that's experimental. I'm sorry I'm a little passionate on the subject.
No.
Tragedy focuses the mind, and that's what I'm here saying to you.
Well, and just so you'll know that the focus is not on the drug companies. My freshman year here, I had the most wonderful little secretary, Natalie, and some of the lobbyists will remember Natalie, remember her, Bill? And she came down with a very aggressive kind of breast cancer. And there was an experimental drug. And at that time, I represented the Speaker of the U.S. House. I did everything but stand on my head trying to get it. And the drug company wouldn't let us have it because they weren't going to go against the FDA. So that, when I give my questions, is from begging and pleading and calling the Speaker and, trying to get it for Natalie on this very issue because she was dying.
Well, my wife and I visit 100 ALS patients every month. It's one of the things, purpose is great therapy. I'm sure we've all learned that in our life. So I'm not just speaking for me.
Right.
I'm speaking for maybe in my 6 years, 1,000 people I've spoken to. And there is a very dark level of their lives that they're facing, and they're paralyzed by it. And so this hopefulness, this kind of act, this right to try law is something that would enliven the debate for 30,000 people. And 5,000 are diagnosed every year, 5,000 die every year. So we stay at 30. So thank you for considering that and for allowing us the time.
Well, and like you say, maybe it would change the drug companies' attitudes or something, because that's where I was coming from. They were just so, no, we're not going against the FDA, that it was very disheartening. She died the next year very quickly.
I'm sorry.
After going to session to radiation twice a day. And so we've been through that, some of
I
us
wish
are
you'd
here.
have had a chance.
So do I. Well, and she did. She got the drug right at the end. It came out of the final trials right at the end, and she was so sick it had no chance. She got one dose, and it had no chance to
I
help
like
her.
your story better than mine.
No, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and try to help other people, and I hope that maybe you will be here 3 years from now, that maybe those stem cells are going to get active and start doing their job and
Thank you.
and be a successful type thing, and, I wish you the best, and Henry's really great, and I'm glad you're part of that trial. Okay, so is there anybody else that would like to speak besides the lobbyists and the, if not, are there any other members that want to ask Mike or his guest while we've got him here from Arizona? Any other questions? Okay. If not, then Mike, can you come back and see us, and we'll talk
More than happy to come back
on
next time.
Monday. And we are adjourned. Thank you very much and everybody in the committee sticking with us through the end on this.